Greetings, everyone, and welcome to our MSP Risk Bootcamp. Thank you so much for joining us. This is day 1 of 4. We're going to be breaking it up to make it a little bit more digestible for everybody and hopefully get in your schedule. So thanks for coming. We really appreciate it. I'm joined today by 2 illustrious cohorts in Matt Lee and Shay Cohen. I'm going to introduce the 2 of them and then hand it over to Matt, and then he can patch it over to Shay to kind of introduce themselves and kind of give a little background about themselves. So Matt, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, so a lot of you in the audience already know me, so this makes it easy. I'm Matt Lee. I am a recovering MSP. I was part of an MSP that started when I got there at 7 of us at just under $1 million in revenue. And then we grew that to 3 and 5 and 8 and merged to be 28 and then grew that to 40 and ultimately sold successfully at 14 times EBITDA 2 years ago in November. And I was the director of security during a time when we found out after the first part of FAFO. We did that and found out, and we lost to a ransomware gang about $3 million in total economic impact from an acquisition we made of a company I call Voldemort. So yeah, that's my background. I now work for PAX 8. PAX 8 sponsors my breakfast, lunches, and dinners for me to basically just spend time with the community, a lot of the awesome humans actually in the audience today, and watch us all grow at the same time. So I'm here as a student and a teacher, I suppose.
Appreciate it. Shay, you want to introduce yourself, sir?
Yes. Thank you very much for everyone for attending. My name is Shay Cohen. I'm one of the founders of Kamanja. Um, Most of you know our platform and what we're going to do. Um, Many years work as a security engineer, Linux engineer, and all my knowledge I put on Kamanja, together with Mr. Perkins, that started working with us a while ago. Um, and helping us shape the future of compliance, that our vision simplifies compliance for MSPs and their clients, and hopefully that we are going to achieve this goal. Thank you.
Excellent. And I'm Martin Perkins. I've been in tech since 2000, started in the Air Force when I worked on electronics in the military there, and then worked for AT&T and telecom for about 10 years and moved into the MSP space. Ran MSP, did business development, kind of ran the gamut of jobs, finished up in the MSP space running one, and then moved over to security. Did that for about a year, and now I'm with Kamanja. Happy to join them. They've got a really great look at how things go. So I've joined them as channel director, and I'm helping drive the initiative here and make sure as many people are exposed to the product that Shay and his team have built, and that I've been so lucky to join up with. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get things kicked off. I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. If my cohorts can let me know when they can see that, I'd appreciate it. We good to go? All right. So like I mentioned before, this is day 1 of the MSP Bootcamp. We're going to be covering basically risk management. The goal being that we kind of ease into what MSPs need to be doing in the risk management space, how to go about it, a little bit of a guide to what you should be looking for when you're going through that process. As I mentioned before, this is day 1. And what we're planning on covering today is basically getting you to the idea of performing risk management for your clients properly and increasing revenue. And some of the ways we're going to do that is helping understand the concept of risk management for starters, developing methods of managing risk, how to begin performing that risk management, how to treat risk, and then how to monitor and improve risk management. And I want to kind of go back to the increased revenue component, because one of the things when you actually start to understand the risk for your clients, that you're actually digging into what actual risk your clients are being subjected to, you're going to be able to maximize their security spend. You're going to have significantly better sales pitches. I mean, I don't know if anybody is here said, right, well, you need 2FA, and they're like, why? And you're like, well, because it's good. Well, when you do a risk assessment of someone, you actually have secure footing to speak from those positions of, this is why, here's what's at risk, so on and so forth.
Yeah. I think the other thing, let's rewind just a little bit real quick,
Sure.
Martin. So I think the real codification of why are we talking about risk management now? And I know a lot of you out there are doing risk management in some form, But it really is, we for the longest time as an industry said, we'll handle your everything. We're your white glove. We'll solve your business challenges. We'll put on these tools so we can protect you with security. And even in the early days, we said, oh, I'll put on Sentinel-1. We'll add that in MDR and that solves it. And only did we realize as life goes on that that's not really true. And really, how do you make these decisions? Aren't these one-sided, I'll stop it, I'll fix it, but really rather a series of complex decisions around what we do with risk. And I think that is the point we're trying to make. And I also want to bring it back with one more piece that Alyssa Miller was on stage at Wild West Hackin' Fest 2022. And she stood up on stage and she says, as a CISO, our whole lives we're told that the language of business is risk. And then she said it's horseshit. The language of business is profit, raw, unadulterated profit. And at the end of the day, risk is a way for us to codify and make decisions on that profit and make an educated gamble. And to go further, she said, in fact, MSP, or in fact, executives that own this company or that run this company or that are responsible actually are rewarded for taking risks. That's why you are in business, is you take a risk to be in business and risk your revenue and your time and your energies to hopefully make a profit and provide for some either goal or mission or for revenue and pay that you need and deserve as an entrepreneur. And so we just have to understand that risk is actually the language that has been missing in the ways that we have these conversations with clients when we say, I can't stop everything, but I can make you make decisions that help you understand that maybe here we take more precautions and maybe there we don't, because these two things don't come out to equal results. And I think, Martin, that brings it right back to where you are, which is, I think having these conversations is the future of how we deal with clients around security. And probably not only do they increase revenue today, they actually fight against the commoditization of everything that we are. As an MSP, if you're old enough and you've ever gone and said, hey, I'm going to go and get a new computer and put in a Sound Blaster 16-bit. Like, you had to go set a COM port on it, let alone the fact that I had to buy a sound card to be able to do sound. But I had to put a COM port on it and set the IRQ with little jumpers before I plugged it in to physically install that card in my computer and make it work. Do you do that anymore? Is there any part of that anymore? And even take it to modern times. I used to set up Exchange. I needed 10K drives for this part of Exchange volumes. I needed this kind of storage for this part of Exchange. This is the way we're going to back it up. Here's the way we're going to structure it. This is the type of protections. No, I turn on a $20 freaking license of Microsoft Office 365 Business Premium, or 26 now, or whatever Microsoft got us up to, right? But the point is, we're having a commoditization of what it is to be an MSP that now gets backfilled by these needs to explain risk and have conversations about technology and driving business success in a healthy way. So I'll get off my damn pulpit before I fall and break my neck. But that's my opening salvo on risk conversation and why it matters.
No, I agree 100%. Only in that I think it doesn't combat it. I think it elevates this conversation above the commoditized portions of it, because there's still going to be the massive components of it that we can't fight the commoditization.
Yeah, it doesn't fight the commoditization. It replaces the revenue and the value statement of what you're doing.
It elevates you up stack to be able to still maintain margins and still be able to actually provide that, to that point, that white glove 100%. Service you talked about before.
Yeah,
100%. So, one thing, the first thing we're talking about is frameworks for risk management. Two of the big boys out there are going to be NIST 800-30 and ISO 31000. And I rather than read all this, this is a good reference for anybody that's watching. But NIST really focuses on an evaluation of an organization based on their individual threats. So if you've gone through any of the threat analysis, frameworks, you're going to start with a threat, whether you have threat actors, drive failures, all kinds of things that can happen within your organization that can cause issues. And then you have vulnerabilities based on those threats, right? What can happen? And then you're finally ending up in, what is the risk to my organization?
So what is a threat, Martin? Define threat for people. Well, because we just roll like everybody knows what a threat is. Help me understand.
I mean, a threat could very well simply be, like I mentioned before, you have a drive array that dies, right? That is a threat. It could be a threat actor. It could be a Bob walking along the alleyway, and your server room has a back door to the alley, and It could be Bob, right? It could be
Yeah, Bob
anyone.
Coppage, who we're talking about. We know for sure.
but those are the threats, and there's a lot of them out there, obviously, and you have to quantify down to what's realistic for your organization, such as threat actors are a constant threat. Phishing. Go ahead.
I like that we said this, right? Yeah, 100%, because words matter, right? I had a conversation on my Beard Banter episode with John Manley that's been around, or it's been around forever. No, I can't remember his name. I'm sorry about that. I misattribute. But basically, we wanted to break down the threat is usually an active thing. It's something that is going to happen, that's happened. People often confuse vulnerability and a threat. And right, let's maybe tackle what is a vulnerability then, and how is that different than a threat? What is that, Martin? Help me understand.
Well, vulnerability is when that threat actually is realized, right? That say that Bob in the alley does find a door unlocked and pushes in, or
well, it's more that the door was unlocked, right? I think the difference of a threat is Bob's the threat, right? Because he's going to be the guy that would walk in a server room and do something bad.
Right.
But the fact that I've left that door unlocked makes Bob's job easy. I know Bob's not great with a set of lock picks, and therefore, had I just had some physical controls, his hands are jittery, right? But he just had some physical controls, he wouldn't have been able. So in my mind, the vulnerability is the open the door. The vulnerability is not having multiple raid sets. The vulnerability is, right, when you start getting into these things, the threat is the action component. The vulnerability is the actual piece that will be exploited, because you can have chains of vulnerabilities that a new threat exists as a result of, right?
Oh,
and
right.
so
Yeah.
I just wanted to put that as we're talking about these things for people. A vulnerability is the Death Star having a vent that you can fly down into that's unguarded, that has no protection, right? The threat is some bloke in a jet flying along until he shoots down into it, right? That's the point I'm trying to make. It's Luke Skywalker.
No, I understand
versus
completely.
the
That was a much better way to phrase it. And so, and then that lands us on risk, right? Which is the actual, what happens to our business, the impact. And I really liked how you quantified risk, we talked a little earlier about risk and how you determine the amplitude of risk, if you will. Would you mind covering that?
Yeah, because I think when you get into it, when we step back, what kind of risk management capabilities are there? You have qualitative and you have quantitative, right? Qualitative is this attempt to kind of discern from a gut feeling perspective of it, some number, to then sort risks so you can manage that risk register and make decisions on those risks, right? And then you have quantitative, which is trying to actually suss out the economic impact, the actual numbers and cents of an event. And they're all lies, both sides of them. So once we know we're both lying to ourselves about the reality of an impact, and we're just trying to make separating capabilities, then I think an easy way to, right, by that I mean like separations of like, well, I might want to deal with my 20s, but a 4 I'm okay with, even if I'm wrong and it turns into a 6, or right, and then we'll deal with it. So, but the point is, when you're looking at risk management, I always like to use risk equals the threat or the likelihood times the impact of a certain event. Now, you got greater deep into the actual, how do you get those numbers? How do you get to some point where you're okay with that understanding? But if you think about it, like the likelihood of something happening times how bad it's going to hurt me. And I was talking about this with my kids because, of course, I was teaching my kids risk management in the car while we were learning to drive. But I was telling them, as you're in this parking lot at 5 a.m. on a Saturday morning, I chose that time because I've reduced the likelihood of something happening. And guess what? If you're going 5 to 10 miles an hour in a parking lot with a few fixed objects and some bushes, the impact of that is whatever my wallet can bear. And it's a certain number that's quite insured. And so I am okay. But the second another car came in at this time and started driving in this empty parking lot, I made my kids stop. And they said, why are you making me stop now? I said, well, your likelihood has changed as well as your impact. If you hit another car at the same speed, you've doubled your speed. And if you have another car in your operation area, then you have a higher chance of you hitting them. Why? Because you suck. Your vulnerability is you don't know how to drive a stick shift. You dump the clutch. You jump 6 lanes. You can't park a freaking car. You can't even stop where I ask you to stop. Left doesn't always mean left to you. And your brain power seems unable to focus forward. So the vulnerabilities, now with this new existential vulnerability and potential threat in my area of operation, means that I'm going to make a different decision on what that likelihood and impact multiplication table looks like. So I guess my point is, if you're an MSP and you're going through this decision, you can get really deep into the weeds of everything that might be the vulnerability or everything that might be the threat or everything that might be, but really trying to get into this quantification of any given event, what is my likelihood based on some of these things? Like, do I patch well? It goes down. My likelihood went down because I patch quickly. So that kind of thing. So it would be risk equals likelihood times impact is the simplest way I can distill it down, in my mind.
No, agreed 100%. That's kind of that's how our platform does most of those calculations. So it's right on target. So that covers NIST, at least how NIST 800-30 works pretty well. ISO 31000 really begs against a framework. And that's a bit of a different approach to take when you're doing risk management. It can be an effective one, obviously, when you're looking at frameworks. They were made for a reason. They were made for best practices, and so some very smart people put them together. That doesn't mean they're going to be completely comprehensive, but it's going to give you a great place to start, right? It's going to give you a great kind of framework to lean into and kind of do a gap analysis based on the control sets that are identified in that framework versus what you have established in an organization. So that's really in my mind. Any other differences that you want to outline there, Shay or Matt, on those two frameworks? All right.
No, I get. I mean, NIST 830 is, to your point, not framework driven. Is that the thought process? But the other one, because they've now given you the context, the things you're going to go look at. This type, is that what you're saying about ISO being
exactly.
delineable from? Okay, awesome. Yep, great.
All right, so here's a little visual, and honestly, Shay, I would love to, if you wouldn't mind jumping in on this one. I think you have a good idea of how these two work pretty well, and I was hoping you could kind of walk us through what these look like.
Yeah. So there is a big difference between, as you two mentioned a few minutes ago, between the NIST and the ISO methods. So ISO, it's more proper for managing, from my opinion. Of course, it's the understanding risk on a process. So the first thing, if we go to the ISO, so first of all, you need to understand the context. Then you try to understand the risk there, analyze and make the evaluation, and then the treatment. Um, and then it's all the time rolling back. But from the NIST perspective, it's quite different. You first of all understand what is the threat. Then you identify the vulnerabilities, you determine the likelihood and the impact. From ISO is the opposite. It's starting first of all, okay, I want to understand what is the threat, what is the risk, what is the threat, what is the vulnerability, what is the risk, to identify it first, and then go to the analysis and all of those kind of things. So for my opinion, when you understand the full process from the beginning to the end, ISO is more proper because you can understand before you're starting it, you know all the workflow, and you can say, okay, I know all the process, and I can put my finger on where is the risk. Instead of NIST, that for my opinion, it's like, okay, during something happen, I can analyze it and understand likelihood and impact, and then determine the risk.
Yeah.
Right.
I think one of the questions that I'd kind of ask on this, Shay, is, are you saying on the left side, we have this thing where we're going to identify threat sources and events,
Yep.
which is this immense pool, right? It's literally everything.
Yep.
It's everything. And then we're going to find the vulnerabilities that make us susceptible to those things. So we're going to narrow it down. And then we're going to determine how likely it's going to happen. And then we're going to go, wait, but this was on a toaster that's sitting somewhere, has no access to data. It's actually just out in the shop. Like, why do I care? And you start now getting into magnitude last. Does it seem that in ISO they're attempting to get that context establishment early that says, hey, we're talking about critical health information systems. We now need to talk about what's our risk identification. And I almost feel like you would use a little bit of a conjunction in there, because in ISO, the risk analysis, risk identification doesn't get deeply into the threat models themselves in this statement, right? Where NIST does get more practitioner level, tactical level.
Let me get you. Yeah, sorry. Before you're answering it, when you do the ISO, you first of all need to understand in general what are the likelihood, the impact, build your criteria. Then you start going deep dive into the process. From other end, the NIST is during the process is based on any kind of risk. You have the likelihood and the impact, and then you build your heat map, your metrics, and all of those kind of things. So, Martin.
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think that, yeah, with ISO, you're starting with what you're trying to safeguard functionally, right? You pretty much have a list of the things that you're going for and
Right.
assessing your gap, and that's how you're assessing your risk. Whereas NIST is more holistic in how it approaches, developing that list of risks that you're subjected to. So, realistically, and anybody that's starting risk management, I will definitely say that starting from a framework makes life a lot easier. It's a great way to. I'm not saying that
Well, it
using NIST to
narrows
kind
the
of.
scope to the things that you need to be focusing on.
Mhm.
In my mind, to agree with you, Martin, on this is saying, I would agree saying if I had a focused on these 19 things I want to protect and the things I need to be looking at from a framework, it gives
Mhm.
you that contextual awareness that as you switch into other modes, I think is kind of what you're saying.
Well, yeah,
Is
and
that,
it also
yeah,
definitely makes sure that you're adhering to whatever framework that whatever industry you happen to be in is
sure.
required to by law. So, HIPAA or CMMC or whatever FTC safeguards, whatever framework you're having to adhere to, it may ensures that you're hitting the check boxes that they want you to. I hate. Sorry, I used the word checkbox. I apologize. I did not want
Yeah,
to say
triggered
that.
me a little bit. I'm
I know.
okay. It's cool. I didn't even die a little inside. It's all right. I still love you.
But it definitely makes sure you're covering all the bases you need to cover,
Yeah.
and you're in line with what you've set out in the beginning.
Yep.
So
Agreed.
so this begs the question: what's the importance of risk management to you and your clients as an MSP?
Yeah.
And it was a lot of the challenges that we're addressing right now. Obviously, 0 days are a thing, right? And that doesn't mean that we can avoid 0 days. That's something that's going to keep on coming down the pike. But having controls in place to respond to them is one of the things. So, when we talk about technology vulnerabilities, that's kind of what we're talking about. Um, then, data privacy and compliance. I mean, I just touched on that just a minute ago about the different frameworks that you're required to adhere to. Almost all of the compliance frameworks focus on data security. That's really, I mean, other than like
Yeah.
CMMC who have practices at heart. Most other ones are really about making sure, and that the most ones I've seen in addition coming down the pike are around making sure that individuals' data is safeguarded. Matt, you want to say something?
No, I was just agreeing with you on
Okay.
that. The privacy aspect of it,
Mhm.
and a lot of the things that happen when you switch into those privacy rules like CCPA, New York Shield, things like that, is you're gonna have real impacts from that just from losing the data, not the safeguards and things you put in place
Oh.
to protect, right? They don't all come with safe harbor in that regard. And so
Mhm.
the barriers or the risk is higher because if I lose data, then it's going to cost X, right? It's much more predictable as that regard goes, than if you had something where you have like the ability to say, well, I had reasonable security in place, and therefore I'm not subject to this. Falls apart a little bit when it comes to some of the way privacy laws are being implemented. So, just
Yeah,
as an
that's.
aside.
It'd be interesting to see how FTC safeguards really as far as prosecution goes, because it has some teeth,
Yeah,
especially from a gross negligence standpoint. There, with jail time potential on there, which most of the other frameworks don't have quite that degree of aggression attached to it, and
sure.
so it'll be interesting to see as that goes through, because a written risk assessment as a component is like the second tenet of that framework, and so. Having that done is something that it'll be interesting to see once they actually start prosecuting how that starts to cascade through the industry. I think it'll make a pretty big impact because the footprint's really large on FTC safeguards. And then
Yep, I
obviously
agree.
cybersecurity threats, there are constant phishing attacks, all that kind of good stuff is our bread and butter now functionally as far as our talk tracks. Go ahead, Matt.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to cover like when we talk about back to technology vulnerabilities, think about vulnerabilities as not just being patch and then it's vulnerable, patch and then it's vulnerable, but like even in the way cloud products function or the way I've configured it or how new changes, like think about token theft, for example. If we get into the technical nerdy parts, right? Token theft, when I have a OAuth token or OIDC token that's being intercepted in a man in the middle or AITM or adversary in the middle position, then I can steal that token and replay it. But there are vulnerabilities that are there this whole time that I could have that stolen and that a threat actor could make a threat by stealing that token. But as technology changes, guess what? With some products in Microsoft, you can now set hardened tokens that have an encrypted component. And so, to your point, in one, the challenge that it rapidly advances and changes, to your point on risk management importance, to even understand those vulnerabilities and how they correspond to a threat and whether you're subject to it or not are challenging. Another great example of that is like Felina, for example, the one where you could just send a well-crafted mail message with a calendar invite in it, and then that would create a dump of the LSAS, which would dump the NTLM tokens that I could then start cracking offline. But that isn't true if you didn't have NTLM. If you were only AADJ with no hybridization, only Azure Active Directory with no hybridization, then that wasn't actually there. It was not a threat. It was a vulnerability with no threat to me, and the vulnerability didn't make me susceptible to anything that created a damaging point for me. So it's an interesting challenge to deal with, and it's the principal one I think MSPs have, which is contextual understanding of the endless sea of vulnerabilities and threats, even just dealt with in two little micro versions. And then when you come to threats, this is one where I would actually say MSPs aren't really doing a great job. And what I mean by that is you're saying in here, ransomware, phishing attacks, malware constantly evolve, but they're not looking at threats. Most MSPs don't have a threat feed where they're aware of what types of threats for their industry, what's specifically going to be targeting, what kind of things should I be looking for. Oftentimes they're partnering with somebody else, right? And to your point, this ability to say, right, it's not all just me. It could be shared responsibility. Somebody else is my threat feed. I'm relying on a Huntress or a Blackpoint or a name. I don't want to be exclusive or inclusive, but just anyone in that regard that's doing some of this threat piece. So just keep in mind that this is where often vulnerabilities and threats, do need to be separated and talked about separately here, and that threats are typically those actions and things that are coming against them. Vulnerabilities are my weaknesses and the things that I haven't done necessarily to put in place to protect against those. So those are two sides of that same coin. Anyways. Yep.
And I think that brings up a couple things. The shift from prem to cloud has left a lot of stacks in the dust as far as security stacks goes. I mean, there used to be a time where a standard security stack would do most of the protection you needed, even without, I'm not saying you should have done a risk assessment, but you could have covered a lot of bases with a standard security stack.
You could assume a lot of it stayed in the walls of this garden,
exactly.
and therefore anything applied to this garden was in the walls of this
exactly,
garden.
Exactly.
And that breaks down very much with the rise of cloud, right? That changes drastically.
So SaaS management and monitoring is a whole new, which very, very few MSPs have really, gotten a beat on.
But in the same breath, and I don't want to get off on a tangent too far on this, but I'm one to do. But those same cloud services also enable a more holistic view of what is data and risk management. Like as you start looking at tying into SaaS providers, having shared responsibility matrices, having this understanding of this kind of we're all in this together. Now, I know that's not the way it plays out today, but more and more as this happens, you're going to start seeing that those same cloud services will be the way that someone writes a very scalable, I will look at all Microsoft for these type of actions. I will look at all, and you start getting into, I think, a more scalable understanding and healthy understanding. I believe if you rewind back to the walled garden model, we sucked at that too. And that was bull crap too. And I don't think it was ever better. I think even when we said we were wrapping it tightly, you go back and I look at some of those same organizations that haven't adopted cloud, and I would pwn them with my phone book, like, if you're honest. And so I think we're all moving towards a healthier understanding of risk. And I do think a cloud services in general will be a large part of the solution to that challenge, as well as the creation of the challenge today. So
100% agreed. And also the shared responsibility matrices, I think that's also going to be, that's going to be coming more and more into focus on what the cloud provider's responsibility is versus
they won't be able to EULA it away down the road,
exactly.
right? Today they EULA most of the risk away, but that's going to change.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and that covers the dependency on cloud services, and dependency is that word is true, but it's more of a transition.
I think it's interdependency is the point. It's not just dependency. You have this understanding that the world is shifting there, and that you have these things that are interdependent now. That I think all kind of depend on each other.
Gives us kind of a negative. I think it's more of an evolution into cloud services. I mean, I think obviously that's where scaling of any kind globally is going to happen. You can't, everybody can't scale internally massive infrastructures, and so centrally is just the way of the thing. So understanding what impact that has on threats is critical at that point. And then emerging technologies. I know AI and IoT. There's been a lot of change. I mean, dramatic amount of change here recently in that. IoT is literally everywhere. I know some people even on this call, that the amount of smart home components, myself included, that are in their homes, it's insane, and so there's risk associated with all. We've seen plenty of hacks that have come from HVAC systems that had a
looking at you, Target, all the way back in 2013, right?
Exactly.
Like the very OG.
Exactly. And so it's just what being aware of what kind of impacts those have, and AI is cracked a lot of codes when it comes to bypassing spam and things
it's
like that.
more barrier to entry reduction, right? The way I look at AI is it made it a lot easier for people to have a lower barrier to entry on some of these attacks and some of these using of vulnerabilities. Like you can get somebody to write me a script to execute this, and it can be pretty quick on some of those things.
Yeah, once a proof of concept hits the internet, it definitely the turnaround for mass adoption goes very much quicker now.
Oh yeah, seconds, right?
I think when we're speaking about AI, as a that employee not expose, for example, for ChatGPT, some company information because it's free to log in and it saves there. So that you not expose and ask some question about the company that are confidential, and if they hack to their account, then all the information can be exposed. So this is the huge risk. I know that many companies that not allow, they block any AI platform to be using on laptops.
Well, and I think that's where when you see a risk-based organization starts to tackle that challenge and saying, hey, we have a unfortunate relationship with risk to profit, like we just said. If I take a risk, I have a higher chance of making a profit. Oftentimes, right now, it also could blow up in my face. But ultimately, that's where businesses have to make a healthy decision. And how do we safely? I just watched a whole title industry conversation about how do you implement technology and like AI and machine learning and other things like that into your world in a way that helps manage that risk and be safe in that risk, right? Like one company went full in, they educated their users, they did regular reviews to make sure what they were posting, they set parameters over what they could use in it at this current given moment. And the other one said, hey, we're not allowing it. We're blocking it completely from our world right now. We're doing those things. We're going very slowly into the risk decision. Very different positions in the world. One was more using it for things that were marketing and helping me write prose and things like that. The other one's saying, how do we implement this to make it easier about doing title management and validating actual title legal rules? Well, guess what? The other one needs a lot more risk management because it has a lot higher impact than whether or not my words sound great in a marketing context. And I think that's one of the things about risk when you start thinking about it. That's why it comes down to the relative impact of what you're doing and what guardrails you've put around it and what impact it has to the business, what type of business. All of those things come part of it, all the way back to Martin's early point of we want to start with whatever frameworks you're supposed to be in your industry. If you are in HIPAA governance or if you're under, whatever it may be, because that gives some of that context of what those impacts are potentially. But emerging technologies are a challenge, and risk management helps you as a business take those risks healthily. In my opinion, I don't think that we should think of risk as don't do this or we stop. It's let me educate you on it. Let's do the things we can do to mitigate it. And if we decide to take the risk so it's a business objective being met, then we decide to take the risk and you're well aware of it. That's the reality of risk management, in my opinion, of how risk. Anyways, get off of it.
No. It's 100% right in that you always have to do a cost benefit analysis, right? Because if we weren't willing to accept any risk, then no business would do anything anytime anywhere.
Yeah.
And so
profit.
Being able to go through and assess what the impact of the business is and whether the benefit of moving forward with that accepted risk is worth it, then you go through and charge. And so 100% agree with that.
Which is what you're seeing with, I don't mind tackling real quickly the SEC and the way they're trying to regulate this. There's some recent legislation passed to try to stop what they're doing in some ways for the reporting aspect. But what they're really trying to get down to is, as an American investor in our stock markets, do I believe that this organization, right, has disclosed to me the risks they're taking and what they've done about it, right? Am I betting on the right horse? Kind of is the point. So, I do think if you haven't followed SEC's regulations, they're wanting you to be able to disclose material risks. They're starting to come after. They just came after the SolarWinds CISO for saying he misrepresented risk to the board and to investors, right? You're seeing this shift to where the risk conversation is really what we're at. And as long as you're doing the work to make a reasonable understanding of risk and help make business decisions as risk, you just got the seat at the table you wanted anyway as a MSP and as an advisor, right? You're getting to help make business decisions centric to their risk and impact. So anyways, yeah.
100%. All right. So we have a little mini case study here on and I'm going to wait for Matt Lee to rip me apart as I go through this, but that's kind of expected. Cybersecurity vulnerability in the cloud environment. So cloud platforms are we talked about before, are really kind of blowing up, and not kind of blowing up. They're really taking over. Put it that
Sure.
way. The infrastructure is shifting dramatically, and most folks are following that shift. So the risk management response is you got to identify and assess, mitigate, and then communicate. And so in the identify, assess, you identify vulnerabilities, and we talked about this earlier, Matt, and I liked how you spun that. But identifying a vulnerability and assessing through continuous monitoring, that implies both your own internal cloud infrastructure as well as SaaS or third party.
Well, I think the point is when we think about cloud, there's different things you have to think about, right? When we're talking about whether it's software as a service, what they're responsible for, what that shared responsibility looks like, whether it's platform services or infrastructure as a service. And so when you think about it, it depends on what vulnerabilities you are now responsible for based on which one of those and which flavor or mix of those you're using. And when you talk about things like a patch, for example, just saying patching tells me it's probably IaaS. Why? Because I can't patch Microsoft's platform services. I can't patch their function services. I can't patch their SaaS. That's them. That's their responsibility.
Mhm.
And so when we start thinking about it, what do I have in those scenarios, though, that are part of this chain that are talked about too? Well, guess what? Vulnerabilities could be things like I described before of not having the proper conditional access structure set, where I've now not made it that I'm actually hardening tokens or that I'm only using encrypted tokens on the applications that support them or whatever that may be. And so when you start thinking about vulnerabilities found through continuous monitoring, it has to be in the context of which cloud you're talking about. If I'm talking about IaaS, then I'm going to want to manage just like any infrastructural server, whether it's patched, whether it's up to date. Those things come back to the operating system level discussion. But if I'm talking about something like cloud, I might want to assess, has it drifted from my standard, what I asked it to be set to? But I might also then want to say, has my standard drifted from what the actual threat delineation is, or what the vulnerability delineation is, right? If you start seeing threat actors, like what we've seen in the last few months, move more and more towards AITM attacks, stealing or stealing tokens and doing token
Mhm.
theft, which I think every MSP sitting on this call has had at least a client, I would imagine, that's gone through a token theft scenario. But I've been demonstrating in Evilgenics since like 2019, 2018. This has been a viable vulnerability that you can set conditions to protect against in a cloud environment. You can set session persistence. You can set session origination. You could use FIDO tokens to protect against that session theft. There are things I could do to mitigate those vulnerabilities that reduce the threat impact to me, because now an AITM attack goes, it fails, it can't steal my token, and I don't lose all my juicy bits. So I think the point is that's the official term for profitable data, just so you know. We've agreed upon this. But I do want to make the distinction that when you are thinking about cloud and how we're going to manage it, you have to think about each of the contexts and each of the contexts in the lens of what you're responsible for. You have less responsibility in SaaS than you do in IaaS. You have less responsibility in PaaS than you do in IaaS because of those things, but you still have different and shifting responsibilities. I have to do different configurations now in SaaS, and I have to use SSO when they offer it. I have to, do those other things. So anyways, yeah, just
Well, and
side
then
tangent.
watching, one of the things to be aware of is as the threat landscape shifts, your cloud services may not be shifting with it, right? As far as what controls you have available to you and things of
Yep.
that nature. So that's just to plain English it. It's just like there's a lot of times where the threat landscape leaves who you're working with behind. So as you're dealing with this, make sure you're continually assessing these things. And this comes into the risk management dysfunction as in general, is that you're constantly monitoring and maintaining and making sure that controls are in place. Good.
And I've already said MSPs aren't threat centric, right? MSPs have not focused on what are the baddies doing. MSPs have not focused on what are those indicators that people are doing those baddie things to me. They've
Mm-hmm.
focused much more on what are the vulnerabilities, what are the things that I can stop when they're detected, and Magic AI will find them and stop them. And so my point is that you said it well. You said, your cloud environment might be left behind. The threat actors and threat landscapes may have shifted, and you have not with them. And that is a real story because you're not focused on the threats. You're not reacting and changing things based on the threats you're seeing. Instead,
Mm-hmm.
you're focused on whatever marketing material tells you that Microsoft now has a new CA policy,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think I just want to, and maybe I'm not saying this very eloquently, but I would just say that we are not focused on the threats enough, and risk management forces you to think about the threats from that perspective.
Well, and
If that makes sense.
I know I like that you said, because I'm going to steal it as a segue into proactive risk management as a platform, as opposed to an individual assessment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%.
So when you're managing risk, it is not a fire and forget, and then we'll wait till next year to see how we do.
Right.
Risk management is an ongoing process, and if you're not using it that way, then you've got a good, depending on how long it takes for your assessment to happen, a good 8 to 10 month gap on when you update your controls, which is not. The threat landscape does not pause for our assessments, just as an FYI.
Do you know when the FFIEC last updated their guidance about using an MSP to the banking industry, the small to mid-sized banking industry in history? Guess the date.
Oh, gosh. I want to go really, really old because it feels like it should be really, really old.
Give him a second, Matty. Googling it right now.
It's like 2006, y'all.
Oh, wow.
They have not updated the guidance on managed service partnering since 2006. You mean to tell me there's nothing different about the way we support clients and organizations in 2006 to now? Wait, the RMM was pretty much invented since then. Most of the actual work in PSA was done since then, taking on more and more administrative roles. Like, come on, y'all. Like, seriously. And so I guess the point I'm making is, if you are looking at that cadenced model of risk management being a timed based thing that once a year I'm going to do, you're already way behind the ball. It changes drastically, and regulators and are also unable to do the same thing. They find themselves giving old guidance in a rapidly changing world. And I think continuous risk management is really just the understanding of, what did I change in my business, right? In CIS, it's termed as comma space, or when significant business changes occur. New line of business, way we do process differently, third-party vendor we're bringing in, different things the way we're doing it. Those are all continuous adjustments made at the operational level of a business that dictate and change the way I might approach a control. And I think, I got you off your tangent, but that's the point I'm trying to make, is we have to think of this as a much more holistic and part of operations as an extensible service, because that's the only way you can be good at risk management, in my mind.
It's a continuous process. It's not, just to, again, the nutshell, to layman's terms, risk management is something you do ongoing as you onboard and offboard employees, as you have incidents, as you have business changes. All these things are all triggers to reassess and reaffirm your control set. So, and then one of the things that I think a lot of MSPs miss out on is the communication on what's going on and why, on the whys and things of that nature. Because we all struggle with the whole, what do I pay you for syndrome? If everything works great, what do I pay you for? If everything's breaking, what do I pay you for? That's been a classic MSP joke forever.
Yeah.
And communication really illustrates to them that the work that you're doing, as well as helping them understand the risk, because communicating risk and having them understand especially for the decision makers, is really critical so they can make comprehensive decisions.
And it's often communicating that to someone that doesn't want to listen about it, that doesn't care, that doesn't understand. And I think that's the most effective thing that MSPs have to get good at, which is, how do I communicate in a way that means something? And you said right before the show, Martin, we were talking about this. I want to distill it down to, what does this mean to me if this happens, right? And if you're doing effective communication, it has to be in the term that people care about. It has to be in something that matters to them for it to be something valuable, which means it might say, hey, we did these 9 things so concrete plant number 7 doesn't go offline, and you don't have 17 dump trucks waiting on concrete to go pour this road surface that you're doing, and you don't wait for, like, those kind of things, where when you're talking about these, how do you contextualize it? Back to the way, ISO tries to approach it. How do you contextualize this for that person to make it valuable? Because if you simply send me every vulnerability you dealt with and every mitigating and every risk register is left, I'm not going to know it. I'm not going to care. And it will not make me take action to change what I'm doing. You have to, in that communication layer, in my opinion, get really good at making sure that there's a what's in it for me, the WIFI FM, right? What's in it for me? Why does this matter? And if it doesn't, then don't put it in my purview. Make it something that I can go get, or something I use as some granulated statistic. But anyways, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, I think it's how do you do that well?
Echoing it exactly, the question of what does it cost for you to be down a day, tying the things that you're doing back to actual profit or loss to the company. because we just like you started out the show with, right? The profit is the number one thing. The business that's what businesses rise and set on. And if you can tie that into how it impacts their revenue and profit, that's going to get the attention. I 100% agree in the contextualization of risk, and the things that you've done. Right, we've prevented X, Y, and Z. Which if that line had been down, it would have cost you $3 million or whatever that looks like.
Right.
My opinion around it, I saw many reports, uh and I think for for showing to executive, it's like graphical red, green, and yellow thing. This is where we started. This is where we are right now, and this is what we need to do in order to mitigate it. And how we get into that process, I think this is the most important thing, because people understand, especially executive, they understand the colors. They don't understand how deep is the risk, and what do they do. And this is also good for the MSP, because based on that, if they do it properly, they can do a lot of upsell on it to another solution that they maybe cannot sell before of that.
I would agree with that. Go ahead, Martin. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, when you're looking at visionaries, people that have that entrepreneurial spirit, that's generally how you can impact them in the short term. I didn't want to step on what were you saying. If you want to follow up with that, Matt, fine.
No, I was just going to say, and it's not always the opportunity of loss. Sometimes it's the opportunity of positive. And I'll give you an example.
Yep.
When the CISO of Starbucks, the current CISO of Starbucks, was trying to implement FIDO tokens or FIDO-like methodologies for them to sign in to their workstations for the baristas, he didn't win this on an argument of how much risk it would reduce, right? It wasn't one on, hey, guess what? FIDO tokens are less likely to be compromised, and therefore my likelihood goes down, and the risk took her from a big old 27 down to a big old 22, and we're very happy about that change. Nobody gives a shit. I don't mean to say it that candidly, but nobody cares. He said, I won it by translating it to the fact that my baristas would be able to sign in 15 seconds or less versus 2 minutes or 45 seconds to 2 minutes based on passwords, typing it in, waiting on a token push, saying yes to it, doing number matching, to saying nope. They walk up, put the card in, type in a PIN, and they're functionally going to business. It means if I have 15,000 Starbucks globally, and of those 15,000 Starbucks, I have 40 baristas, then that we can serve X many more cups of coffee this way. Now, it's the upside of reducing a risk sometimes. You can correlate that directly, and I won't say they always come this way, but when you can find that attachment to revenue that's real revenue gained and not just loss, you get a win there. All right. And that's the fastest way, in his opinion, as he stated on that stage, to get budget, is to tie things to things that enable a company, that let you work from home safely, that let me get you a laptop quickly without having to send it to my MSP and actually type in and set everything up. We're going to do this in a more secure delivery way. We're going to make it faster for you. We're going to make it more bespoke. We're going to do those things and reduce risk. And if you can tie those together, you hit the real win there, because it communicates directly to opportunity, not loss. People are either motivated by fear of loss or by opportunity, right? And opportunity for more. And so you carrot stick. Anyways, yeah.
Agree 100%. Opportunity cost is one of the things that I think most folks don't think to utilize in their arguments, or at least their discussions.
Great call.
Because it's opportunity cost is one of those things that, yes, it's not going to cost us money, to do this, but if we don't do it, what does it cost us? Yeah. And that's
will I not be eligible for this line of business? Will I not meet? And you could see that kind of in the very slow and archaic play towards high trust and those things in the medical world. Like, it was chasing a positive. I would get more revenue, blah, 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 because of these things. Right. And so you do see that play out. It's just really slow and often that way. So when you think about opportunity costs, if you're saying, hey, I'm not going to do CMMC, I'm not going to follow 800-171, your opportunity cost is those contracts, right? And on the other side of that, I am going to do these, even though I don't participate in this world, might be the opportunity of getting that business you wouldn't get, and might be why you're chasing something, right? So that's two sides of that same motivation coin.
Right. And then even just the story you just told, right? The Starbucks story, right? The opportunity cost was all that time savings. They didn't, it cost money to do the thing, but the opportunity cost was greater than what the actual cost of doing the implementation was. All right. So this want to talk a little bit about different type of risk in the MSP industry. I mean, you have security risks, operational risks, compliance risks, strategic risk, vendor risks. We've done a pretty good job of kind of running the gamut of. we've done a lot of touching. Our tangents are pretty effective at painting a with a
Covering the
wide
next
brush, I
things.
would say.
Yeah, for sure.
But that being said, it's like compliance risk is more and more. I mean, if you look at what's coming down the pike, this is something that is going to become a massive driver in the industry. Right now, it's something that's on the radar, but I don't think most MSPs are really using it as a driver. I think the government's going to force the hand for most of us in this respect. I mean, obviously, the New York rule and we have states doing this, cities doing this.
I do love that you're codifying the difference between a security risk and a compliance risk, right? And that is a big key distinction, right? The security risk is threat actor phones me, takes my stuff, sucks, right? Compliance risk is me having that happen means I don't have eligibility for the next contract, or I didn't report it properly, or I didn't do the controls I needed to have, right? So those are the things that are different. Like compliance is, do I do what I say I'm going to do? The other risks are broken away from compliance. But in the past, that's all people thought about. If you talk about security, what do they bring up? SOC 2, right? They bring up their ISO. They bring up but in the end of it, that's one tiny piece of, am I meeting the compliance as stipulated by this? It is not the totality of the operational risk of this, the security risk, to your point, the strategic risk, ability to actually adopt a new technology and maybe do something unique and novel, the vendor risks of this service provider, like all of that crap comes into play as other fields of operation and battle of where I would lose. And yet we've only historically focused on the solution to this being compliance, right? And that it has to be more holistic than that. Compliance is really just an outward observation to see if you are doing the healthy things you said you would do in a contract, not the granularity of how well you're brushing your teeth. Compliance is I brushed my teeth. The security risks are, did I brush between? Did I floss? Did I put it in well? Did I do the full 2 minutes? Did I actually get... Those are all things that we don't talk about. Anyways, I'm getting on another tangent.
It's a great thing because the old adage, being compliant is not being secure, and being secure is not being compliant. That's something that is so, compliance has driven so much of the security that it's almost become a misnomer that you are. And I think it's well worth repeating, 100%.
It's awesome. But these are great codified types of risks, right? Strategic risk, vendor risk. We've covered them through our tangents, to your point.
Yep.
Pretty effectively.
Like I said,
so.
we stray far and wide, don't we? All right. And then some of the areas that Shay, you want to talk to this slide a little bit? I think this would be best rounded out by you, sir.
You're doing an amazing job, guys. Why do you need me?
So realistically, this goes back to some of the big things that are triggers, right? I mean, there are risks, if you will.
Yep.
We talk about 365, Azure, and AWS. Those are cloud services that have an enormous amount of information, and the dependency on those is growing, by the day. And so doing your proper risk assessments against these things are critical, and servers laptops obviously have been.
But if you took this to a framework on Office 365 and the configuration settings, the security settings, I'm looking at 4 around baseline configurations for the predominance when we're looking at a PaaS service. In Azure, I'm looking at 4. I'm looking at 5. Same thing with Office 365. I'm looking at 5 for identity and access management. I'm looking at 6 for proper access controls. So I'm looking at those things. When I look at servers and hardware failures impacting service availability, I'm looking at proper redundancy design and good networking principles. I'm looking at those type of things. On the servers and laptops, talking about configuration aspect that we're saying on laptops, for example, are they encrypted? Is my data secure? Am I using AIP? A lot of things go into this. And if you focus on the frameworks first, to your point, early in this conversation, all of these points will be brought up in the lens of those frameworks.
Right.
So
well, I would just to inject. I don't want to interrupt your flow, but most of these platforms have best practices already outlined based on the frameworks out there. So 100%. when you're looking to do some sort of gap analysis, determine if you're doing your security well, those things are available. And reach out to us if you're looking for those. If you're looking for help in that area, feel free to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to guide you in the right direction and get you down that path. But yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to. I injected.
You're great. No, I think my point is we're going to bring up some common risk areas, But if I sat here for the next 10 minutes, I could tell you even more common risk areas inside an MSP for you specifically. Like, hey, how do you do your organization? Are you structured to where technicians only have access to the clients they should have access to? What's your social engineering capabilities looking like? Do you have the ability to detect when someone's accessing more companies than they should? Do you have the ability to see? Like, that's just one small space of getting down the vulnerability and what that threat and corresponding threat would look like, that we see every day, right? Just looking at this shift towards social engineering and SE tactics. How are you structured to defend against those? Those are not directly technical. Those are
Yep.
operational and decisions.
Well,
So.
and I think that's a great observation in that I think most MSPs are very keen on implementing security controls and doing risk assessments on their clients. When in reality, it needs to start at home.
It needs to start at home, brother. You're right on that.
And honestly, the controls that you just talked about is one of the areas I see a lot of MSPs really struggle with, in that they really, everyone's a global admin for their CSP platform, and it's just,
well, and even Microsoft forced that, right? Like in the very beginning, until GDAP, DAP was monolithically you're in or you're out. If you're in the admin agents user group in Azure AD, then you are now in the partner center as a full admin to every client. You can do as much admin things as they actually manage to get right in that handoff. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. Is MSPs need to think about. I was asked in Trustmark, and I'm part of a lot of the Trustmark work product that's happening right now, is like, what do you MSPs have? How do I codify your data? What's the most sensitive data an MSP has? And my answer is their client access. The most sensitive data an MSP has is the access to all of the data that their clients have, and it's the summation of that. And so there's, it's a really high aggregated risk, and MSPs. Anyways, if anybody wanted to tackle me offline, be glad to go into the hours of what we put into building Iconic and segmenting some of that risk and what we did at that organization when I was there as a practitioner. So.
Yeah, because I do believe least privilege is one of the things that most MSPs struggle with, a productivity versus security issue. Yep, it's yeah. All right, well, this really rounds out what we had for day one. If there's any questions, feel free to drop them into the Q&A section. We'd be more than happy to engage them. Otherwise, we'll look forward to seeing everybody day 2 tomorrow, same bat time, same bat place. Looking forward to covering basically the steps of risk management a little bit more in detail, and kind of do some more meat and potatoes as opposed to high fly overview. So look forward to seeing everybody tomorrow, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Matt. Great to see you.
Good seeing you.